Tanya and I recently took a trip we'd been thinking about for a long time, the Norwegian mail boat that goes up the western coast of Norway and stops at all the little smaller towns that are otherwise inaccessible by road, or at least difficult to get to. We'd heard about this trip from friends who had taken it in the past, and when another friend of ours from Australia told us she was going on this voyage, we decided we had to do it. The journey, called the Coastal Express, starts in Bergen and ends at the far northern town of Kirkenes, along the border between Norway and Russia. This route is run by the Norwegian company Hurtigruten, and they have several ships making this run every week. Now, since Hurtigruten has been in business, and they've been doing this for decades, there's a second company that is now doing the same thing, and they go along what is now known as the Hurtigruten route. The ships make 32 port stops over the course of the 5-day trip up the coast, and they hit the same 32 ports on the 5-day return to Bergen. Now, you can imagine if you're making over 6 stops a day, some of these port calls are pretty short. And in fact, the ship stops at many of the smaller ports for only 10 to 20 minutes, and a lot of these stops take place in the middle of the night. The schedule is worked out, though, so that there's at least one stop each day for a few hours, so you get a chance to walk around. And some of these towns where we make these little short stops are between 600 and 1,200 people, so you can get a pretty good look at these places in a short amount of time. We're going to cover this trip that we took in 2 episodes. This episode, we're going to talk about the ship itself, which was very interesting. And the second video will be on the destinations we visited. The ship we took was the Hurtigruten MS Nordkapp, or North Cape. The Nordcap is somewhat of a cruise ship, but really more of a ferry that takes passengers to and from the many small coastal towns of Norway, as well as taking cargo and vehicles. The ship itself was built in 1996 and has a capacity of 590 passengers. Although, I don't know how you'd get 590 passengers on this thing. There were about 250 passengers on our trip, and I thought that was just about right. There's about 76 crew. That's the ratio worked out fine. This is one of the smallest ocean-going ships that we've been on, and it measures 123 meters in length with a gross tonnage of a little over 11,000 gross tons. So this makes it quite a bit smaller than the normal seaborne small ships that we go on, which have a length of 198 meters. So 198 versus 123. These are not very big ships. The gangway is on deck 3, as well as the cargo bay for goods and vehicles. The Nordcap apparently has an ice rating of 1C, which means it's designed for light ice conditions, or approximately a little over half a meter in thickness of ice. Much of our trip took place above the Arctic Circle, and the ship easily handled the ice conditions in the Barents Sea and along the North Cape. Now, the Barents Sea, is open ocean and not like some of the other parts of the trip, which actually, go through fjords and the little areas between land, so you're shielded from the Arctic waters. But in the Barents Sea, you're on your own. We did have some rough seas, and the Nordcap did very well. We noticed there were seasick bags placed strategically throughout the vessel, and fortunately we never had to use them, although I think many of our fellow passengers did, because we could tell the next day at mealtime there were a lot of empty seats. The embarkation experience in Bergen was a little more involved than what you might usually experience on a cruise ship, but overall it went very smoothly. We checked our bags at the Bergen cruise terminal early in the afternoon because the ship doesn't leave until 8 o'clock, about 8 o'clock at night, and we had to be out of our hotel. So we went over there, and after we checked our bags, we were directed upstairs to the Hurtigruten guest lounge. And this was a very nice space. And it had coffee and pastries and that kind of stuff until it was time for the official check-in process that took place later in the afternoon. We then were directed downstairs again to wait in line for the actual check-in, where we got our paperwork checked and our room keys, then back upstairs to wait for the safety briefing that took place in a room at the back of the guest lounge. This is the first briefing we've had where the instructions included getting into waterproof protective dry suits before entering the lifeboats. Now, we didn't actually try those on, but we just watched a video of it and we saw where they were located. It's pretty obvious that you wouldn't have to be in Arctic waters floating around for too long before you'd get hypothermia. So these protective suits are a good thing in case there's an emergency. Then down the terminal hallway, across the passenger bridge, and into the ship. You then go to the check-in lobby on deck 3 to make sure your credit card is registered, that your room is ready, and that all is in order. This check-in area has a really cozy Nordic vibe to it. You know, it had some skis along the wall where you were sitting. Were on, or sort of replicas of stumps. So you got this kind of casual Nordic feel. Upstairs on deck 4 is where the main activity takes place for the passengers. The main restaurant is called Torget or Torget. It's here that you will have your breakfast and lunch buffets and a wait-served dinner each day. The food on the Nordcap was hearty and plentiful. There's nothing fancy, but it's very good. And more on the food a little bit later. Also on deck 4, there's a fancier dining room called Kisten, which is available for a fee, and we never dined in that one, so I can't really tell you the difference between the food in that restaurant versus in the main restaurant, which was part of the cruise fare. You get your meals with that, and it was very good. There's also a little bistro area called Brygge on this deck, which serves sandwiches and has more of a bar menu. And we noticed that this is where several passengers who were going from port to port or going to their hometown or visiting somebody, and they did not necessarily have a stateroom for the evening, would kind of hang out in this area. The rest of deck 4 is made up of the service center for booking excursions and settling accounts. Then there's the ever popular gift shop, which was full of wonderful, expensive Norwegian sweaters and jackets and all kinds of Norwegian stuff, But it's Norway. You're not going to get any bargains, but it was cool stuff. Then there are, beyond the gift shop, there's a couple of lecture halls, and that was there that we got our daily briefing, letting us know what was coming next, what excursions were coming up, and little snippets of Norwegian history and culture. As you can see, the sight lines in this room were not necessarily perfect. But, it's not a 5-star ship. Hurtigruten doesn't try to be that, and, you work with what you've got. Deck 5 is where the outdoor walking deck was, and this was a terrific place to go outside and enjoy the fabulous Norwegian coastline. And this was one of our favorite places on the ship, although it was still winter. I mean, you were starting to get into the beginning parts of spring. We were there in late March. It was cold and windy a lot of the times, but when it wasn't, it was a beautiful place to be. Deck 6 is taken up mostly with cabins, but there are 2 hot tubs at the stern, and these seem to either be closed when we went up there to check them out, or when they were open, they were very popular and crowded with people. If you are able to snag one of these, if you take a trip on one of the Hurtigruten ships, it would be a nice place to kind of hang out and look at the view. Deck 7 was probably the most popular deck because it had an observation area and the Explorer Lounge and bar. And in between these 2 features is an area called Multi, which was a good place for families to gather or people to work on jigsaw puzzles, play cards, and relax. And there's also a small fitness room, which we had told ourselves that we were going to use, but we didn't. Talking about the multi-purpose room here, the multi-room, I would say that the average age of people on this voyage was over 65. There was one large group of passengers that were part of Road Scholars, which used to be Elder Hostel. So it was a group, a tour group that was on, and they had a little bit of their own special programs, but so that was that age range. But you're also going to get some families and younger people that are simply, they're not there for that full 5 days up, 5 days back. They're there to visit relatives or friends or go on to the next town. Let me talk a little bit here about the food on this trip. We were both very pleasantly surprised at the quality of the cuisine on Hurtigruten. We were thinking before we went on the ship that maybe it would be more like a Greek ferry. We've taken Greek ferries before between different Greek islands, and we thought maybe that would be something like that. But no, it was very nice. And this isn't what you would classify as a pure cruise ship. It's more of a working vessel / ferry that happens to have a lot of cabins for passengers. So you're not going to find elaborate dishes with French names that you can't pronounce. What you will get is a lot of fish. Hey, after all, it's Norway, and that's what they've got. And I think we ate more salmon on this trip than we've eaten in an entire year. And, think mountains of salmon at lunch or breakfast. Every dinner menu included some kind of fish, whether it was salmon, cod, Arctic char, maybe some other kind of fish, trout. And then occasionally there was something a little more exotic like reindeer or some dish that was made of moose. You always had 3 main courses to choose from. One was a vegetarian dish, and there were lots of vegetarian possibilities on this ship. So, if that's what you are, if you're a vegan, maybe a little bit tougher, but vegetarian, there was no issue at all. And so, of your 3 items on the menu, one would be a vegetarian, one would be fish, and then the other would be a meat dish of some kind. But it was all wonderful. Let me show you our cabin. We were on deck 3, and we had what is called a polar outside cabin, which was the least expensive cabin that still had an ocean view or a window, or a polar outside cabin. And we were just a few cabins down from the gangway on the port side. So we were able to see whenever we stopped and decide whether it was worth it to take sometimes the 10 minutes to quickly get on and off the ship. Our room was certainly tiny, but it was certainly doable. And once you get used to the Scandinavian sleep system, they call it, which has 2 blankets, the bed was great. So, if you have a sleeping partner that, often, steals the covers or the blanket, these are a little smaller. You have to kind of work out how they overlap. And anyway, you get the picture. You can figure it out. There was on our deck a laundry room for guests. Nothing fancy. We never used it, but apparently people did, and it did the job. Now, let me tell you something about being on the port side and when we would come into some of these places to dock. If you've been on cruise ships before, you know, and especially these bigger ships, oh my God, they come into a port, what a production it is. I mean, they have to maneuver the ship here and there and then, you know, get the thrusters and get it just right. Then they've got multiple lines they're throwing out to tie to the pier. On the Hurtigruten ship, okay, number one, it's very small, so and very maneuverable, so it can come right up to the pier. That's not a problem. Our overall evaluation of this voyage, we came on this voyage with modest expectations of the ship itself. And we were going more for the adventure of stopping at all these little Norwegian ports and making it up to the North Cape. But we were very pleasantly surprised with the ship and with Hurtigruten in general. The atmosphere is definitely not formal. It can best be described as friendly and casual. The staff, they're competent overall and generally friendly. Sometimes, you know, they're Norwegian and it may take a little bit to, you know, get them to crack a smile, but once you do, you know, it was fine. You won't find any showroom on this ship. There's no casino. There's no art auction. There are certainly no water slides or anything like that. Some of these amenities that you might find on regular cruise ships. There were some interesting presentations, and there was the mandatory initiation of the polywogs by the Norse god Odin as we crossed the Arctic Circle. And the poor souls who volunteered for this initiation got ice cubes either poured over them or down their pants, which was great fun. Great fun for us because we were watching this and we didn't participate. The staff, as I said, were very friendly, but without being generally friendly, without being over the top. I mean, they're not going to, you know, greet you every day and say, "Oh, good morning, Mr. So-and-so. Oh, good morning, Mrs. So-and-so. How are you?" Blah, blah, blah. No, they're pleasant. And sometimes they'd call, once they got to know you, they'd call you by your first name, and, you know, it was fun. Don't pretend to be something that they're not. They're simply very good at providing a very unique sea experience with authentic Norwegian style. Now, what did this experience cost? Well, and as I said, we had the least expensive room that had a window. The trip, without any excursions or extras, we did take one excursion, but without any of those, cost $7,664 for the two of us for 11/12 days. That's almost $700 a day, or $350 a day each. Now that's expensive. But if you consider that the experience is something that would be difficult or impossible to replicate, and that Norway is in general a very expensive destination for Americans no matter where you are, we considered the experience worth it. This isn't something you're going to do all the time. But to do it once in a lifetime, you know, it was worth it, and we're glad we went. If any of you are thinking about doing this kind of voyage, please leave a comment and ask us any questions you'd like, and we can, you know, be happy to, let you know what we think. Please watch our next video coming up, where we highlight some of the destinations we visited on this amazing trip on the Norwegian Coastal Express. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.